Hello and welcome to Informally Formal. I'm back again with a stalwart of the business world in Bangladesh that hardly needs any introduction. Nevertheless, let me give a quick introduction of Asif Ibrahim. He is the chairman of Chittagong Stock Exchange, one of the two bourses in Bangladesh. He is a sitting director of BGMEA, the largest trade organization in Bangladesh. He also is the vice chairman of New Age group of companies, garment and textile entity that employs in the thousands. He is a former president of Dhaka Chamber. I can go on and on, but I guess without further ado, a very warm welcome to you, Asif Ibrahim.
Hi, Akbar. How are you? Great to be back in your program again.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to have you. Especially enjoy talking to someone that's in the know. So, Asif, today we're going to be talking about the reasons behind the ascent of the garment industry in Bangladesh. So let's just get started. Asif, my first question to you is, let's start with the very root. Riaz Garments, and then, of course, Desh Garments, and then the decision to start the back-to-back LC, the bonded warehouse, and what have you. Over to you, Asif.
After independence, when the Bangladesh private sector slowly started to gather momentum, we could see the first advent of domestic garment manufacturing that eventually led to exporting entities. You mentioned two names, Riaz Garments and Desh Garments. Riaz Garments also started very early in the late 70s. Riaz Garments, which was established in Urdu Road. Basically, they started off making domestic clothing because there was a big demand for it at that time. But then he also thought about starting off with exporting. And I remember seeing a story of him getting the first order of a few hundred or maybe a little bit more number of shirts at that time. But apart from Mr. Riaz of Riaz Garments, Mr. Nurul Qadir Khan founded Desh Garments. Mr. Nurul Qadir Khan was a valiant freedom fighter, and he was also involved in bureaucracy. So he had both the experiences, and he sort of got the policymakers at that time to be able to understand the concept of back-to-back letter of credit and the concept of a bonded warehouse facility. And when these two policies were actually implemented by the then government, that actually led to a boom in the garment sector. During those days, Bangladesh did not produce any materials for converting these materials into garments. Everything was imported from Hong Kong, from Korea, from Japan, from Indonesia, from Thailand. You talk about fabric, you talk about buttons, you talk about threads, you talk about interlinings, you talk about cartons, everything that is required, even pins.
Asif, let me interject here real quickly to ask you a very crucial question. So back in the day, when the times that you're talking about, when we had to import everything, what percentage would you say was just the labor portion that Bangladesh provided? What portion was that? Was it like almost 85% is what we imported?
It was even more than that. It was even more than that. Majority of the components had to be imported. Only a little percentage of value addition we could generate in Bangladesh during that time. So
the labor portion.
You see, and at that time, we didn't have the necessary skills for people to sit in front of a sewing machine and do the operation for sewing, for doing the operation in the make sections, ironing, and the entire process that it needs. We didn't have any manpower who could do that. So Mr. Nurul Qadir Khan took the initiative of sending young and energetic team to Korea. With the help of the Korean government and our government at the same time. And they were able to train in Korea in the entire process. And then when they returned back to Bangladesh, they were the first people who got involved in the manufacturing of the ready-made garment sector in Bangladesh. And from them, it eventually spread. All of these developments in Bangladesh took place at the same time when Sri Lanka went through a period of political turbulence. And a lot of the buyers who were buying from Sri Lanka during that period then had to automatically look for an alternate sourcing destination very quickly. Hence, they looked into Bangladesh, and the initial buyers, they came to Bangladesh, and it was something that just took off. So from late 70s, we could see a rapid development of garment factories from early 80s, because of the fact that you did not need a huge amount of capital investment to set up the factories. People could start off with something like 10-15 lakh takas and set up a factory using 60 to 100 machines with maybe 150 workers and so much, and go on like that. So that's how it started.
Right. Let's now talk about how did we get into textiles? How did we get into the more capital-intensive textile spinning and all that stuff? Over to you.
The industry started in 80 until 85. The number of factories increased from one or two to about 160, 70 during that time. Under BGME, 160, 70 factories. And also there were factories who were doing subcontracting initially that had sprung up as well. So basically, once that started, it actually started with the woven sector. Knitwear came in sometimes during that time when Bangladesh started manufacturing single jersey, then PK polos, and heavy duty for winter items, fleece and others. But that took some time. But then what had happened is because of the fact that backward linkage for setting up knitting and dyeing and finishing was relatively less investment requirement for setting up. Some initial entrepreneurs set up the knitting dyeing units for backward linkage for the knit sector. Entrepreneurs in the knitwear sector to set up the backward linkage. So they imported knitting machines from Korea, from Taiwan in the very beginning, and some from Japan. They brought in some dyeing machines. So that is how it evolved from 80s onwards. So I would say from 80 to early 90s or even mid 90s, you could see knitwear backward linkage really taking off, and Bangladesh is establishing itself as a very strong supplier of knitwear to the world. But then we could see that also because the woven sector was also growing rapidly. Bangladesh was manufacturing shirts. Bangladesh got into denim, got into trousers, got into jeans, got into padded jackets. At that time, there was a big need for also setting up backward linkage in woven. So some very big factories started during that operation during that time. Beximco Textiles Limited is an example. Then Munnu Fabrics Limited, they came about. Later on, many other denim factories came into the market. So eventually the transformation took place. We still are not fully sufficient in terms of where we want to be for woven backward linkage. But at the same time, during that time, a lot of entrepreneurs also got into the spinning business. So we would, they would bring in the cotton from different parts of the world and convert them into threads, into yarns, because there was a growing need for yarns. First of all, for the knitwear manufacturers who had gotten into the backward linkage. So that automatically led to a demand for yarn availability in Bangladesh. That led to entrepreneurs setting up a spinning mill. So you can see that gradually the transformation took place. Once it started from 80s onwards, it just started taking off from that period.
Right. Asif, let me just quickly switch gears. We have Bangladesh, there is no doubt about it, that we have done astoundingly well in the garment sector. And then through establishment of backward linkages, we have gone into a lot of other areas, washing, dyeing, finishing, knitting, as well as spinning and what have you. But I must also now bring in the thornier news that has been going around that last year, Vietnam has overtaken Bangladesh as the second largest exporter of ready-made garments. I believe, though, since Vietnam's export expanded through the COVID period, whereas Bangladesh has contracted, I believe that we'll see a reversal this year. But nevertheless, your thoughts on that, Asif?
Well, it happened. Vietnam took over because one of the key things that we have right now, which is going against us, is our over-dependence on cotton-based products. When the world has shifted away, not necessarily shifted away, but there is a growing trend for man-made fiber-based garments, and a demand for that has surged. Those are products which are more comfortable products. People are doing away with wearing suits nowadays in the West. They want more clothing that is comfortable and that that's easily maintainable. And also because of the weather patterns, those tastes are changing, and most of those products are based on synthetic materials. So we need to focus on that, and strategy is being put in place to attract investments in those kind of fabric manufacturing and those kind of garment manufacturing. So I think we'd be able to adapt ourselves to the threat that we have faced from Vietnam. And I think we have the resilience to overcome them in the near future. We have done it before. I think at one particular time, India had overtaken us quite a few years ago, but we again regained our position as the second largest exporter. So we should be able to do that, and I'm confident that the Bangladeshi RMG entrepreneurs in the textile sector entrepreneurs will be able to do that.
Right, Asif. It begs the question, of course, the pattern in which Vietnam has grown, as opposed to the way Bangladesh has grown, is quite different. Okay, in Bangladesh, it's been homegrown growth, so to speak. In Vietnam, I believe it's more than 80% of the export comes from FDI, foreign direct investment led export. So man-made fiber, if I'm correct in saying so, is a lot more capital intensive to set up a man-made fiber unit as opposed to natural fiber cotton unit. So now I believe our entrepreneurs in Bangladesh have the wherewithal now to go into that, as well as the fact that now we have opened up more in this space, FDI.
Absolutely right. We are setting up the special economic zones across the country, and there is a growing demand to attract those kind of investments. So we have to be very specific in terms of trying to attract the kind of investments that we need for Bangladesh. And we certainly need investments in the textile sector, backward linkage for man-made fiber production capabilities. That would complement the existing $34 billion industry that you have, because we have to grow on it. We have talked about export diversification. Of course, that's very important. But the fact of the matter is, we haven't been able to have a second or a third exporting sector other than RMG and clothing that has, at least come up to the level of $3-4 billion. So on a short to medium term basis, we have to have our policies focused towards catering to the growing demand of the changes of the textile and clothing sector of Bangladesh. And accordingly, we have to attract those specific type of investments that would enable us to develop those capacities and capabilities and the necessary human resources.
Asif, what a pleasure it's been. I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule. I'd like to thank our audience for joining us for this wonderful session. And I would urge everyone to stay safe. We're going through some precarious times here, so please stay home, stay safe. I'll catch you in the next session. Bye-bye.